much. Hi, everyone. It is a huge honor for me to be here for the London book launch of my very new book and my first book, Change Starts Now. I feel like today is a celebration of the last decade of my life on the front lines of creating change, having started at 12 years old and today being 24. But it's also a lot bigger. Today is a celebration of the movement. You'll be hearing from incredible changemakers and dear friends on their lessons learned of what the movement, growing up in the movement, has been like, lessons learned, and also how we continue to keep on going. I'm going to start off with a couple of readings from the book, so you get a little bit a sense of the style and the energy that the book has. But essentially, Change Starts Now has 100 lessons of everything that I learned from 12 to 24. And I'm officially 4 months a published author, published by HarperCollins Holland. Thank you! And I will say, since publishing, I have 100 more lessons that I can share. But that's a little bit what change-making is all about. So I'll start off with what it was like to write the book. This book is so much more than pages with words or lessons learned. Writing this book for the last year has been an adventure through 21 cities, a broken heart, a move to the other side of the world, a 35-kilometer race, and what feels like 1,000 rounds of edits. Honestly, this book is a living, breathing project of its own. It's a collection of memories past, present, and a hope for the future. The first few chapters are really about the beginning. Growing up on the island of Bali, I grew up in a house with a tree in the middle of it. And the passage starts with me sitting on the veranda, looking at this tree and having an inner dialogue with the tree. As a 12-year-old, I looked at this tree every day and said, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. And rooted in this inspiration, but also this deep connection with nature, I learned my very first lesson. We are nature. And the second lesson comes quickly afterwards. We protect what we love. And I think that having grown up on the island of Bali really built this strong foundation for me. And today, just moving to Amsterdam, I try and hold on to this island energy and bringing it into every room, whether it's a classroom or a decision-making room with governments or business leaders. Those two very important lessons is something that I always try and instill. But growing up in this movement was not always easy. And if you think I'm a serious person today, imagine the 12-year-old Melati. I was always described as an old soul in a young body. And in the book, there are a couple of different poems that I wrote in my diary as a frustrated, growing up 12-year-old. And this poem I wrote when I was in 2014, and it's called Growing Up. The girls in my class grow up so fast. No Barbies but bras, no candies but boys. I'm not ready yet. I don't want to board the teenage jet, flying into the sky with a new mind, leaving Winnie the Pooh and the princesses behind. I'm afraid of the land I will arrive on. Shaky ground, nothing left, everything's gone. I'm stuck with the baby face, while the rest walk in mini skirts with such grace. The girls in my class say, grow up. But then who knows what the meaning of grow up means? Does it mean to be wise and free, or does it mean to be wearing push-up bras and too much makeup? So then I said, no thanks. I'll stick to the candies and Barbies, Winnie the Pooh and the princesses for just a bit longer. I'm sure the jet can wait. I turned on my heels and saw their faces filled with confusion, and I thought to myself, the girls in my class grew up too fast. I often get the question, having started so young and introducing myself today as a full-time change maker, Melati, do you ever feel like it was a sacrifice, that you missed out on your childhood growing up in this movement? And I always say no. And I talk in the book about how it's always a very quick to defend the duty of change making. No, I didn't sacrifice my childhood. But it was also because it was a movement, it was work, it was a sense of duty that was fueled from a place of joy. I talked talked about lesson number 1 and lesson number 2. We are nature and we protect what we love. And I loved the environment around me, but I also loved the community that this movement built. So I always say that it was the childhood that I would never not want to have, you know, and I think that this is something that you'll see in the speakers today, that this movement is driven by joy. There's actually, I don't know if I told you, Dom, but there's a quote that I share of you of the event that we talked about actually upstairs when we were in Den Haag in the Netherlands, and I heard Dom say, if I can't dance, I don't want to be a part of the movement. And I thought it was a really beautiful and very simple way of expressing how much love and how much joy there is in this space. There's one more passage that I'd like to read, but I'm going to have to find it. I have too many sticky notes and too many passages always. But it's in chapter 6, I believe, and it's all about how growing up from 12 to now 24, working also across generations. I would find myself in many different rooms with CEOs or government leaders, and I started to recognize also the generational differences. And here I say an oil spill in the sea can be considered a casualty of a business move for one generation and a complete catastrophe for another generation. For one generation, the expansion of more fossil fuel rigs is considered a profitable investment. For another, it means signing our own death certificate. Is a dead tree more valuable than a living tree? Are wild and alive fish less valuable than fine dine sushi? And it was this lessons learned of the different perspectives and also the frustrations of a lot of the reasons why change wasn't happening. I come up with 4 excuses that I've learned in these different conversations growing up of why we don't change fast enough. And these excuses are, 1, the fact that people are not ready for change. Believe it or not, this is still something that we hear very much, whether it was through the plastic pollution campaign that I started at 12 years old, or working on changing education curriculums. The first excuse is that people are not ready for change, which is really frustrating because I'm sure many of you in the room and who are in these spaces know that people are more than ready for change. The second excuse is that we don't know enough yet. We need more data, we need more numbers, we need more research. And while yes, we do, we cannot wait for that to be push for change. It has to happen parallel. The third one is change is expensive. And this was something we heard in Bali a lot growing up, building the campaign against plastic pollution. The alternatives were more expensive than plastic, which is easy and cheap to use. But how costly will the inaction be? And the last excuse is change is something that people fear. And I think that this is also on a more human-to-human level. Maybe you and I can experience this from day in, day out. But again, how do we overcome that excuse is the joy in seeing all the different role models, all the different solutions that are possible in our fingertips. And the last passage that I will read that I think sets a nice tone to the panel discussion that we will have with other changemakers starts with a poem, moving from the frustration of all the excuses and the change and the challenge of why it takes so long. Because for context, I started at 12. Bye Bye Plastic Bags was the first organization we built. 6 years after a lot of campaigning, a hunger strike, a petition with hundreds of thousands of signatures on it, and the movement of so many organizations, Bali, my island home, finally banned single-use plastic bags, straws, and styrofoam. So yes! We showed that despite the excuses, despite the challenges, change is possible, and people power can create real positive impact. So, I'm always fascinated about how much time we also spend talking about problems, because imagine we would spend as much time and energy as we do on the problems, but then instead on the solutions and everything that is possible. What a world we would live in. So the poem was written last year. I was 23 years old, and it begins like this. What if it all works out? even better than we had all hoped and planned, so much better than we could have ever even dreamed. What if the forests grow back and the rivers flow full, and the bees and the extinct rhinos, lizards, and polar bears all came back, and Earth was home once again to all living species? What if it all works out, even better than we had all hoped and planned, so much better than we could have ever even dreamed? Close your eyes and visualize the world you want. What does the world look like? I was in a workshop, and the lead facilitator was guiding us through an exercise where we had to imagine the world we want. You can come up with anything. The wildest dreams come true here. Afterwards, we opened our eyes and had to write it all down. The more detailed, the better. My world had lots of big trees, fresh, clean rivers, butterflies, and bees. I saw beautiful sunshine powering our buildings with light, gardens everywhere providing everyone with fresh food. Community-led action was at the center of every decision, and young people, of course, were actively involved. The point of this exercise was that if we can't imagine a better system, a better world, how are we supposed to create one? It's hard to work towards something that you can't see, feel, or touch. Dreaming big is key, but making it tangible allows us to see results. And when we see results, we build the confidence and courage we need to keep on expanding our imagination for a better world. Gloria Steinem once said, "Without leaps of imagination or dreaming, we lose the excitement of possibilities. Dreaming, after all, is a form of planning." When my sister and I set out to make Bali plastic bag-free, people said it was an impossible goal. But slowly we started. We built a team and momentum, and after each cleanup, we felt a success. After each government meeting, we felt a little closer to the goal. Every single signature we collected, donations we secured, every single step made all of these tangible small goals made us realize that change was at our fingertips. And we kept on going, and we kept on going. Today, we've built a learning platform called Youthtopia, which hosts over 200 programs for young people to learn from young changemakers how to create change. And we did this because we felt there was power in the peer-to-peer learning, in the transparency of communication, what worked, what didn't, and how can you do it better. We host over 5,000 students who access free learning material every single day. And the book with 100 lessons is just the beginning. But I also want to get started with the conversation and share even more lessons of incredible frontline changemakers. So I'd like to welcome our speakers to the stage. Please give them a warm welcome. Okay. Oh my gosh. I still also have to kind of pinch myself in the moment that this is happening. The book launch here in London, and I'm incredibly grateful and very blessed to be amongst such incredible humans. So thank you for your time, your energy, and your knowledge that you're about to share. But first, shall we start with you, Dom? Share a little bit about who you are, and then we'll go around all the rest.
Sounds good. I'm so happy to be here with you. And hi everyone, my name is Dominique. I am a climate justice communicator, writer and musician. And I was also a founding member of the Youth Climate Justice Fund, which is the first global fund to redistribute resources to youth climate justice groups on the ground. I'm also a, indeed. I'm also a trustee and part of Climate Live, which is a youth-led organization to harness the power of music to engage, educate, and empower people, and a full-time change maker, as Melati would say.
Hi everyone, my name is Kalpana and I'm the founder of Nowadays on Earth, which is a social enterprise fighting for urban nature. I'm a guerrilla gardener, technologist, and dreamer. I love that you said that dreaming is a form of planning. I have recently built one of our first cyber gardening tools called Glitch, which basically looks at how we can hack urban spaces to create urban gardens. So we use civic imagination alongside local biodiversity data for you to create your own very garden and connecting you with local grassroots organizations to make that a reality. And yeah, I'm a campaigner for the right to grow and do a bunch of other cool stuff, but I'm going to pass it along before.
Hello, everyone. My name is Clover Hogan. I'm a climate activist and the founder of a youth nonprofit called Force of Nature, which focuses on helping young people translate their anxiety about the climate crisis into action. I actually stepped down as executive director last year, in part due to burnout, which I'm sure we will talk about tonight. And I had the great fortune of going to school with Mel. We both went to school in Bali in Indonesia at a place called the Green School, wall-less bamboo classrooms in the middle of the jungle. So I've had the joy of also watching you on this journey. So very excited to be here tonight.
Well, first, super grateful, Mel, to be here with you and everyone, and so grateful for your life and all the learnings in such a short period of time in your life. So thanks for that. I'm Mauricio, one of the co-founders of Hero. We're a platform that provides a basic income to incredible change makers like the ones we have here. 100 leaders in over 30 different countries, making sure that they have the resources to turn activism from a volunteer role into a paid profession, and building that resilience for the movement in the long term so that we can stay not only resilient but agile ahead of the small challenges that we have ahead.
Okay, woohoo! A round of applause. So I have to have the really big task of not fangirling too hard, but you've got some of the most incredible change makers here. We've got Maurizio in the financial support to change makers, Clover, mental health, Kapana, you're bringing gardening to everybody, and music and the power of translating messages through music. So we've got a really well-rounded group with us today, and I guess in the spirit of lessons learned, I wanted to ask, what would you say, starting strong, what's the biggest lesson that you've had in your change-making journey? Looking back, what's something you wish you knew earlier?
I mean, I think for me, if I could go back in time and tell myself something, would be to let go of the outcome and be more in the present moment. I think because of the work that we do, we're always thinking about the future, which obviously we need to do, but that disconnects us so much from the present moment, and then we tend to not enjoy the process. And so back to I also want to dance and feel joy in this movement. I think it's more being in that present moment, acknowledging and trusting the seeds that we're all planting, and just trusting that they will grow at the right time. So yeah, letting go of the outcome and trusting that everything will be okay. And that's also a reminder to me right now. So. Yeah.
I mean, I love that everybody's bringing up this dancing thing. I don't know, Asha, Chris, maybe the Conduit team, we're gonna have to put some music on. I'm kidding. But I love it. Okay, so letting go, letting go of the outcome. Clover, what about you?
Yeah, building on that, I think when we start out as activists, we have to be kind of outcomes orientated. But I think in being outcome orientated, we can attach our self-worth to those outcomes. And I've met so many activists, I've also been that activist where we haven't seen the success that we want, right? Like, we don't get the piece of policy through, or we get shut down or whatever, and it's so easy to take that on board as a personal failure. And I think youth activists in general typically carry so much weight and responsibility. And so my biggest learning has simply been that I can't do any of this work alone. And I think so many of the narratives around activism are hyper individual. Even with the activists we might see on social media, we're kind of taught, well, there are just these really inspiring people, the Gretas of the world, or whoever, the Melatis of the world, who are going to save us. And as we know throughout history, the only thing that has ever created real change is people power. So rebuilding community and realizing that we can't do this alone, and recognizing that, I can show up and bring my kind of skills to the table, but I'm doing that trusting that others will be able to step in where I'm not able to.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to dig deeper into this, because also in your introduction, you did talk about how you started something incredible and then actually stepped down, and I'm really curious to learn about how that also plays into the narrative of creating space for those who can continue bringing messages and missions forward. But we're going to continue with lessons learned. What would you say yours is?
I'm trying to rack through my brain. I feel like I have so many. But I guess maybe like the first one that I would start with, and it goes really across any level, is not waiting for permission to do something, whether that is starting your own garden or like, making your own organization or just doing whatever action you want to do that makes your heart grow and dance and feel joy for our planet and for our shared community. I feel like oftentimes we build so many self-imposed boundaries because we've given our power away, we've given our imagination away. And taking that back by just saying, like, you have the power to do something, whatever that is, whatever is in your heart, to make that happen, and you've got the resources to make that possibility come true. I think the universe starts to really open doors, not to get too woo-woo and stuff, but like I really believe in the power of intention and alignment, and that the earth itself is on a mission to resource us with the things that we need to create that change. So yeah, don't wait for permission.
No, I love that, and I love that joy has come up so much on this panel. And if I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution, as you said. As climate joy is a term that I talk about quite a lot. It's quite important in what we do to sustain our movement. But one lesson that I've learned is it kind of builds on what you guys were saying, but it's to truly embrace your authenticity and what skills and joys and passion that you have. And for me, if I could go back to my younger self who tried to fit into these molds and fit into these boxes of how I thought, like even down to how I thought I should speak or how I should dress or what the ideal of an activist or a change maker was. And I think just breaking out of those boxes in that it truly can be anything you make it to be. Typically, especially if you're not someone who's often represented in climate and environmental spaces, you can feel a lot of pressure to have to present yourself a certain way. So I'd say definitely embracing your authenticity and everything that you bring.
I love it. So many lessons already, 104 to add. But I think that you mentioned as well, Kalpana, that you don't want to wait for permission to start. But oftentimes, at least in the work that many of us are when we're talking to students or young people around the world, the question is, where and how do I start? It's actually one of the main reasons why I created Youthtopia as a learning platform, to be able to help answer that question. Where and how do we start? What would your advice be, either from your own experience or what you've learned along the way? What are the most important steps when you're thinking about starting your change-making journey?
That's a really good question, and really put me on the spot there. I feel like one of the things that has, I think, for over the last couple of years been a real aha moment is that, our resources aren't as far away as we think they are. Just starting with, the people that and asking questions and understanding who has power where, who has knowledge where, and starting to build those threads and kind of those mycelial networks together within our communities, because everyone in this room doesn't know everything that the other person next to you does, but we're all collectively a huge, web of knowledge, as well as, resources within that. So I think for me, the easiest place to start is actually having a conversation, whether that's with your neighbor or with your workmate or your classmate, about the thing that inspires you or intrigues you or the problem that you want to solve, and just see where that conversation leads you, because I feel like ideas are threads that connect us to one another, and it's not, an idea itself is just like a seed that blooms. A lot of garden reference here, just wait for it. I was just realizing as I'm speaking. But yeah, a seed is just like a garden that will bloom through many, many people. So finding out, what that community is for you and what that garden is for you.
I never underestimate the power of a good conversation, but it's also the power of community, right? So how, Dom, in your experience, also maybe using music as a tool, how have you found that being a successful way to build a community in an authentic way, like you were saying earlier?
I love that question, because I feel oftentimes we can kind of think too much about how we actually bring communities together when it comes to change, when there are already pockets out there and things that we can tap into. And music, for me was one of those. So music is something that is a universal language. People go to festivals, people go to concerts, and in these spaces, studies have also found that people are generally more open to things and opening their minds and opening their hearts. And through this, through Climate Live, the youth-led organisation I'm part of, we've gone to UK festivals with a big pink solar-powered bus stage, and we've spoken to participants there, kind of drawn people in with the music, and then they've stayed for the climate education. And not only did they get to listen to artists and have a good time and be in an accessible, fun, joyful environment, but they're able to directly speak to campaigners about different campaigns they're involved in around the UK. How can they get involved? How can they support? And so there's a very concrete call to action there, but it's also another way to get people involved, as often we see the kind of activism that often the activism that we see is either, you know, being on a stage or being in front of a megaphone, but that can be kind of intimidating for some people, or it doesn't engage everyone. And I think now, especially more than ever, we need to reach a broader audience and engage a new audience of people into the climate movement. And the power of arts and culture is so powerful. And people, not only are they learning and feel empowered, but they also have a good time. And that sticks with you. The people that you meet, the communities that you form, the reason that you want to go back every day to campaigning, to organizing, to being with people, it's about the passion that we have for the planet and what we're doing, but it's also about being with the people that we enjoy. It gives us a reason to keep going.
I think this ties really nicely what we just heard, the power of a good conversation, but at the end of the day, what we remember is the way that people make us feel. And I think I'm in color code of the pink bus, so hopefully we'll be aligned and collaborating. And you know, we've talked a lot about joy, we've talked a lot about fun, but campaigning can also be really, really tough, especially if we don't have the foundational financial support. So yes, we're going to talk about this because Mo, you have a lot of lessons and things to say about funding models, especially to campaigners and activists, to be able to allow us to do what we do well, but creating a support system and a support network with Hero that allows and facilitates this. So can you tell us a little bit more of what you've seen can happen if the funding models are done right?
Of course. I think that's a great question, and one that we often not talk about, you know, like getting activists paid and money and activism. Usually it's like a weird combination, and it shouldn't be. But what we've seen at Hero, I would say in 3 levels. There's a personal level, there's a movement level, and then more of a systemic level. On the personal one, I'm pretty sure if I ask you to raise your hands, no one will raise it if I tell you, like, who will here work for free, right? Like, would you do your current work for free? Just out of curiosity, some hands, right? And so that's what we're asking as society for them to do, like, work for free. And I think just in that simple sense, it's just not fair. But apart from that, it's not sustainable. So I also run a podcast called The Climate Humans. And in conversation with Vanessa Nakate, she said something that really, I think, gets that spirit. And basically she said, yeah, we go to all these conferences. We're all organizing all of this with our communities. We go back home. It's not like something magical happened and we get our rent paid, right? And so that really stuck because we're asking people to invest full time, their energy, their skill set. This requires so much work and then not get paid for it. So I think on a personal level, it's just that resilience, even dignity and respect for the work that they do. Then on the movement side of things, we need to stay resilient because it's not only about passing a piece of legislation. They can definitely tell you more how long it takes to do that. But even if you pass a piece of legislation, it doesn't end there. You have to then make sure that you're executing on that law, and then of course people will fight back. And so you have to stay resilient in the long term and also think about how to not lose all that movement knowledge for those young change makers that Melati is talking about in the schools and, you know, future activists. How do we keep them engaged so that they can also teach the other ones coming up and not lose that sort of institutional knowledge? And then on the systemic side of things, don't want to get too much there because we're talking about joy, but also, I mean, we are dealing with big corporate interests and lobby groups. And so when you think about those structures, well, they're very well funded. They have a lot of resources, and we just need to level the playing field. So the impact of funding mobilizers and activists at those three levels is huge, and just leveling the playing field, making sure that us, everyone in this room as citizens, can have a counterforce to that big lobby groups. It's just building a bridge between citizens and decision makers. In an ideal world, politicians will be looking after us, but that's not happening because those big lobby groups are infiltrated in government and have a lot of interests that are not very good for the planet and the people. And so I think at those three levels, and that's what we've seen at Hero, the impact that has, even just recognizing that this has to be a paid profession, one of the most important jobs of our time, that already has changed a lot. And I believe that at scale, we could really build that infrastructure to really level the playing field for our friends next door.
And we're working towards it, yes. Something that I really resonate with from when I listen to you is this power of coming together and standing up for each other. And I'm incredibly grateful to have the support of Hero also for today's event. And I think that brings to light the direction I want to go forward in on the power of collaborations. The space, for example, here today with the Conduit support to host the book launch in London has been an incredible support. But Clover, from your experience as well, what makes a successful collaboration? What are some of those key ingredients to push forward, especially when we're living in a world where there's a lot of competition, right? It's this narrative of I or me instead of we, and it's every organization or every individual wanting to become everything to everyone. But how do we create stronger narratives and stronger spaces for real, meaningful collaboration?
This is such a good question, and I will try not to turn this into a TED Talk. I think the first thing I would say is I started out as an activist when I was 11. I watched documentaries, and I think the thing that I remember feeling was, anger, frustration, grief. But more than anything, I remember feeling deeply confused. I couldn't understand why I hadn't learned about the climate crisis at school, why I hadn't seen it on TV when my parents watched the news, why we didn't talk about it at the dinner table. And from that moment on, I decided I'm going to commit the rest of my life to environmentalism and kind of persuading people and trying to motivate them. And in the 14 or so years since then, I've learned some lessons on what to do and especially what not to do when trying to get people on side. And I think it's so easy when you feel that emotion, right, that sense of injustice or anger or whatever, you have a very clear reason for caring about this issue and you care really, really deeply. You can feel very frustrated when other people don't care for the same reasons. And I kept hitting brick walls because I would try to persuade people for the same reasons that I cared about the issues. And yet with time, I realized that everyone is approaching the climate crisis from a different angle in terms of their capacity, in terms of the challenges they're up against in their personal lives, in terms of their value systems and what they care about. So for one person, it is going to be that connection to nature. For another, it's going to be their love of community. For someone else, it's going to be, well, I simply can't pay my energy bills. I can't afford to put food on the table. And so I think the most important thing as a campaigner and also when seeking collaboration is to understand what people really care about and how to put the work in to meet them where they are. I think that's the most important piece of kind of strategy that I've learned. And then I would also say just not underestimating the power of showing up as your fully human self with all of your inconsistencies and flaws and vulnerabilities as a means of being able to connect with people. I've started kind of doing this as a way to almost like disarm people, particularly when I'm working with like people in business or like policymakers who are shielding behind all of their status and power and titles. is to start by talking about all the ways that I'm a hypocrite, because I am, right? I, like all of us, like live in a system built on the commodification of nature, the exploitation of people. Of course I'm inconsistent. I still fly on planes. You know, sometimes you can't buy everything secondhand. I do buy new socks, for example. I know, scandalous. I can already see the headlines. You know, I drink coffee, which is super resource intensive. I buy food wrapped in plastic. Like, we all live in systems that make it fundamentally difficult. And so I think, you know, stripping that back and meeting people where they are and saying, like, I have no agenda here other than trying to help you take action and hopefully support you in that journey. And I'm showing up here with a lot of vulnerability. And I think this is where a lot of our work at Force of Nature around mental health has been really powerful, because we've tried to open up a conversation where you're not just hearing from people who are inspired or passionate or hopeful, you're also hearing from people who are really desperate and scared about the current state of the world and anxious and don't know what to do. And I think starting from that place and sharing that I feel all of those emotions just as much as the next person can open up that little window, whether it is for the business leader, the policymaker, or even the parent, to say, yeah, I'm really scared as well, and I don't have the answers. And so I think bringing that humanity into the conversation is a great foundation from which we can build much more meaningful partnerships and collaborations.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think also what comes from this is a level of trust that in today's world is also really difficult to find and to feel and to build, not only human to human, but human to organization or organizations with other organizations. So I think there's this really strong foundation of trust. But there's also another shift that I want to take, because I'm also really curious. In the book I share about the changes of a change maker. And I think this is a more internal journey, which is a little what you touched on just now, of this openness and this honesty. And when I started at 12 years old with plastic pollution and wanting to make Bali plastic bag free, I was immediately on the narrative of the media, but also how I was known amongst friends as well. It's the plastic girl. And you know, all the plastic cups would be hidden before I'd come, or like the bags would be hiding. And today I really focus on crafting and developing educational programs, focusing also on the SDGs, focusing on how to upskill and develop different skills for young people to also be able to create change, no matter if it's in the plastic space or any other place they're passionate about. So when we're change makers, we're often talking about this external outer world change, right? Through the collaborations, through these different campaigns. But I'm curious, and this is up for anyone, do you also relate to the fact of how we as change makers can also change? And how have you navigated that?
That's one thing I've been reflecting a lot on lately. So for context, I started when I was about 18 is when I took my first kind of big action in being part of organising the climate strikes here in London and across the UK. This was called Fridays for Future globally, and was started when Greta Thunberg striked outside of the Swedish Parliament. And that was a lot of the activism I did. And I also had this idea that as long as people knew about the climate crisis, as long as I just kept yelling about it, that action would happen and things would change, and that installing this feeling of urgency and anger was enough to bring everyone on board. And I started to reflect on that actually you can't scare people into action, and that the communication that we have is crucial. And actually we need to tap into so many different communities and whatnot. And I also started to feel very burned out myself. And I think this deep feeling of burnout, and I almost kind of lost my passion, and I felt very anxious. There was a period of time I just didn't want to leave the house for months. I was so burned out with being an activist. And then I thought, how can I bring more joy into what I do? And how can that be part of an impact? And that's when I really started looking more towards music and arts and culture. And of course, all of the strikes and protests and campaigning is just as important, even if that's not mainly what I do now. I mean, campaigning is still one main thing that I do. But there are so many different ways, I think, of being an activist. And we say it all the time, but I think I actually started to internalize that in myself, being like, actually, it's okay to change direction.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to go there, the burnout. And Clover, I know you were like, okay, we're definitely going to talk about this. And it is a big part of the book as well. I think I had my first burnout when I was 16, and I wanted a quick fix. You know, I thought, okay, I'm going to go on a silent retreat 10 days, and I'll come back all ready again, rejuvenated and ready to keep going. Then a year later, I hit my next burnout, and I think what ties in nicely to this is, I think one of the main reasons of a burnout is also a non-alignment, or you're not in line with what you are passionate about anymore, or you're doing it in a way that isn't true to your own purpose. So tell us a little bit about what that was like for you, and maybe what you learned out of it.
Yeah, I so relate to you going on a silent retreat, because I went to a Buddhist retreat. I was like, cool, I'm going to learn this whole Buddhism thing, and it's going to help me overcome my burnout so I can work even harder and more effectively. And instead, Buddhism taught me, like, stop trying to be a human doing, just be a human being. And I'm still working on that, because my sense of self-worth is very deeply tied to how effective and productive I am. But that's a whole other conversation. So yeah, in terms of my experience of burnout, I mean, I think one aspect of burnout that we don't really talk about is that the feeling that precedes it can be really addictive, right? And I think so many of us, you know, particularly as like youth activists and, you know, doing a lot of speaking and campaigning and like protest, and, you know, it can be quite an addictive energy, right? And I remember at COP26, I was averaging maybe 6 or 7 events each day. And I was showing up late to each one and leaving early to make the next one, and physically running through Glasgow to make them all. And it was like this kind of freneticism, right? And, you know, what we're doing is so important. This is the moment, like, this is when we take action. And then when I got home, I lost my voice for about 2 months. Like, my body just completely gave out. And so I think I had lots of episodes like that for several months and years, actually, before I realized that I needed some real change in my life. And that change came through external intervention. So it was literally my partner sitting me down and be like, you can't keep going in this direction. Like, you're going to get really ill. And my family, like even my grandmother, I went to visit her in the hospital in Australia, and she sat me down and said, I don't know if you're happy, you know? And so realizing that my activism was being born not out of this joy that we've been talking about, but out of this feeling of not enoughness. I'm not enough, you know, whatever I'm doing is not enough. It's urgent, you know, on climate is so hard because we have this like, we literally have what's called the doomsday clock, right? And so you internalize that. And, you know, the first time I went to a Buddhist retreat, I felt this prevailing feeling of guilt. Like, how dare I take this time off, you know, when there are so many people suffering, right? So, yeah, it's been, I think, a big unraveling, and it's still a work in progress. And I think the most difficult and yet fulfilling decision was leaving my baby, my organization, Force of Nature, which I'd poured so much into over the years. But I realized that I was no longer able to show up as the leader that I wanted to. And frankly, the team was so ready for me to leave. And actually, in the month after I stepped down, they were doing so well. And I was like, guys, you could have at least pretended to struggle for a minute without me. But they've just been thriving ever since, which is so amazing to see. But that was incredibly, incredibly difficult. And I think I was only able to do that because of the community care at our organization. And when I finally broke the news to them, I was expecting them to tell me they hated me and resented me and how dare I. And instead, they just all wrapped me in a huge hug and said, we're so proud of you. So.
Yeah, I love that, because I think this is also so important, this narrative of the changes of a changemaker, the burnouts. There's a narrative in the book where I actually talk about something I heard from someone else who shifted the perspective on burnouts by saying it's actually a privilege to burn out, because only when we do reach that point, although yes, addictive, this rush, it's a moment in time where we have to go inward and reflect on what that shift needs to look like. And without that, we often just keep going. But You also talk about accountability, right? If we don't have that community, if we don't have that support, who and how are we able to hold ourselves accountable as well? So I want to shift on a sort of closing before I open up for questions from the audience on the power of role models. It's a big emphasis again in the book. It's a big emphasis in the work that I do with Youthtopia. I'm obsessed with role models and real-life young changemakers who can inspire us forward, because again, like I said in the passage earlier, if we cannot see it, feel it, or dream it, how can we ever become it? So I want to ask everybody to share who is your role model that you look up to or that you are continuously inspired by. And this was the question that got all of them, huh?
No, I actually think for me it's pretty easy. I think it's my parents. I think I've learned from them like the power of service to others. And then from there, of course, I have many people I look up to. Cristiana Figueres, for example. I'm from Costa Rica, so of course, it's a natural hero for us. But so many other people, and I think each one of you actually, like I feel so privileged and honored that I get to do this work. Because then I get to be surrounded by all of you all the time. And I think each one of you brings so much to the movement, and that just like feeds me back this energy and sense of purpose. So I think the list will be very long, but if you're asking me for a short list, I would say my parents for sure.
So many people. Yeah, I really share that feeling of just like immense gratitude that I get to do this work. And I think you kind of touched on this earlier of like working through the feelings of maybe resentment or loss of childhood. And I know some of us have, well, probably all of us have felt that burden of responsibility. And but I think for the past year or so, particularly since I've had more space, I've just felt so much gratitude that I get to be in community and work with like such kick-ass people. Like, you know, all of the people up here, but the people in this room as well, like people who just care so deeply. I think the mentors that I look to most consistently are my monastic friends at the monastery, the Buddhists, because they just have such beautiful presence and such grace and such generosity of spirit, and non-attachment as well. Just a very quick anecdote. The monastics at Plum Village where I practice, they're on a stipend of about €30 per month. So that's kind of what they have to, you know, spend and to live on. And the first time I went to Plum Village, there were a small group of us, and one of these monastics went off and he bought vegan ice cream for everyone in the group. And I realized he'd spent his whole €30 stipend, all of his savings for the entire month, just to buy us, these like very, you know, by comparison privileged, well-resourced attendees, these ice creams. And it was just such a lesson in generosity and not placing so much importance on money and consumption and really just being grounded in connection and community. So they're the ones who I look to.
I'm going to say a couple of things, if that's okay. I feel like I have the same sentiment on people. I'm so inspired by people every day, like from the everyday person in the tube who does the kindest gesture to, you know, people on stage or activists on the front lines. I could say so many. But I feel like there's, like nature for me is such a, not to anthropomorphize nature, but for me, like the energy of nature that lives within us, that power of life, the life that you carry, the life that I carry. I feel like I'm so inspired by every day. And similarly to Clover, I had the privilege of living in an ashram for about a year in 2017, 2018. I can't remember. Time is very circular for me. But I think that process has really allowed me to see rest as a form of resistance and understand how change really comes from the power of love. And we can't really transform unless we love. And so I feel like the energy and the power of love, I would say that as my final answer.
You stole my answer.
You can have it.
I was going to say one thing that does inspire me as well is nature. I mean, we are nature defending itself, but spring is one of my favorite seasons. And every time it comes around, it just reminds me that no matter how one can cut all the flowers down, spring will always come again. And I get such a feeling of joy. And I look to trees and mycelium networks at the resilience and the interdependence. And I think there's a lot we can learn from nature. And on people, I would say as well, it is you guys, it is people that I feel so happy to see when I'm in this movement. It's people that I lean on. You know, you have people to hold you in all of these emotions, but also to hold you accountable. And I feel it is truly a blessing and truly an incredible thing to be surrounded by community that I trust and can rely on, and that I feel I have moments where I feel like we will win, we will do this because of the incredible people I'm surrounded by. So definitely the movement.
I love all these answers, and the good news as well is that with the 100 lessons of the book, at the very end come a list of 100 names of changemakers where you can continue learning from them. And again, it's the emphasis on really bringing together this community, which sometimes feels a bit vague. The movement, it feels a bit vague, but again, the names at the end of this book, they're just 100 and there are millions of us, but I hope it inspires you. Before we come to a close, I wanted to open it up to the audience for any questions. Yes, we've got one here at the front. A microphone is coming your way.
Thank you for the interesting discussion. In my role, I mostly work in emerging markets, and I'm there to essentially support with the low carbon transition. And I can't help but feel this sense of, oh gosh, like I'm this white person coming into this role to sort of say what I think they should do based on the science. And I kind of wanted to ask about climate colonialism and your thoughts on that, and if it impacts you at all in your roles as well.
Great question. You want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'm so happy you asked that question about climate colonialism. The climate crisis is something very deeply based on extractive practices and exploitation, especially for those in the global south at the front lines of the climate crisis. And I think one thing that I share a lot is when people have these concerns is that using your privilege or using the positions that you're in to work in solidarity with people is truly important, and we do need people doing that, using their privilege. And I think there's a quote, I can't remember it right now, but it's all about being in solidarity and not kind of viewing people as people to save, but rather people to work alongside, and that there are such incredible people with knowledge, skills, and expertise as well, and co-creating the future. I would say that co-creation, and I think that really breaks through any ideas of like saviorism or whatnot. Happy for anyone else to jump in.
I think you nailed it. Yeah, thank you for bringing up co-creation, because I think it also allows us to also remember that when we do come into a lot of these spaces, we're just as much as sharing our expertise and our knowledge, but also in a position of being the learner. And I think that co-creation element hopefully helps you move forward. Thanks for your question. We have another question over there.
I think I'm going to write a book, 100 Takeaways already, so thank you guys. First of all, to say there's a word called cynefin, which is a Welsh word which is unique to Wales, which is developing a sense of belonging, connection to place in younger children, which I love, and I know listening to you tonight, that comes across as really strongly. My question from an education perspective, 2/3 of educators globally don't feel confident to address this issue with children in the right way, and this kind of echo chamber, people saying the same things to the same people. I wondered, as a panel, how to reach the hard to reach, and have you any examples of, using joy and dance is a great example, and music, but to get to those who aren't confident or don't feel part of this yet, I'd be really love to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Clover, I see you nodding. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I guess from two different dimensions. The first, because we've done a lot of work with teachers and educators on helping them talk to young people from like 5 through, to their 30s about climate change. And I think the first thing would be, a lot of adults are kind of scared of terrifying young people, right? And contributing to their eco-anxiety. But the reality is, like, young people are going to learn one way or another, but you do get to decide the terms on which they learn. And it really helps to ground lessons in climate from a place of agency and action. So, when talking about an issue, whether it's the climate crisis or plastic pollution, colonialism, gender justice, tell that story through the lens of the people who are already addressing it and already solving it. So one of my all-time favorite resources is called regeneration.org. It offers a blueprint for how to not just stop emissions, but actively reverse global heating. And it goes into every sector of society: fashion, plastic, the global economy, and the change that is needed at each tier of society. And so I would say, also when working with young people, like, don't underestimate their capacity for feeling and what they're capable of holding, the nuance that they're capable of holding. I think what can happen if we don't talk to young people about climate change is that they learn through doom scrolling, and they feel really resentful that the adults in their life haven't had that conversation with them. So starting it young, but doing it in a sensitive way that's grounded in, here are all of the amazing people who are already leading the change on all these different levels. And then just quickly on the storytelling piece, there's a great neuroscientist, Chris DeMeyer, who runs the Climate Action Centre or Climate Action Unit, rather, at King's College London. And he has really challenged the conventional wisdom around climate messaging, which says, awareness leads to action. That's kind of what you were saying, Dom, before as well. If enough people know what's happening, then they'll be motivated to act. But what he's found is that the only way to change belief is through kind of self-persuasion. So rather than telling people, here's what you need to do, how do you create the conditions for them to participate in action or experience a different world, whether that is through community or music or food, experiences. So that would be my invitation, and kind of what I was sharing earlier: go to where people are. What do they already care about in their communities? What are the challenges and struggles they're up against? How can you speak to them directly and put in the work of meeting them where they are?
I think this is also this solutions-oriented narrative with the doom that exists and the real science that tells us we're running out of time and we need to change, but then also pairing it with solutions. And then the solutions can be told through the many different narrative and voices. I think schools should implement way more field trips and connect with the world that exists outside of the classroom, because through experience, through the hands-on learning, that's how change can be self-persuaded. And we start to create a sort of sense of, yes, I am still young and I'm a student, but I can contribute to creating change, because that's also really important, right? We want to build strong foundations of confidence. Does anyone else have anything to add on that?
Just teach the future. Sorry. Teach the future. So if I wasn't loud enough, they've been working on having climate on the curriculum, and we've got some really great resources for teachers.
Amazing. Do we have another question here in the front again?
Firstly, thank you for such an amazing session. Shout out to Dominique, who I met
to see
before.
you.
Yeah, vice versa. Thank you for giving me the confidence to be here and meet amazing people. You put in chapter, I read ahead. Chapter 51, page 129, talking about having 2 ears and 1 mouth. The irony of that quote is not lost on me speaking now. But what are your pro tips for listening and doing the best that you can to listen, which I'm not always the best at?
I love that. It's actually one of my favorite lessons that I talk about in the book, and it's actually chapter 5. Yeah. So the I think so. Yeah. Yeah. I know. Sorry. But so we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and the story that goes behind that is actually a lesson that I learned from a young Indigenous leader in Australia, where he taught me a word in his language called Didiri. Thank you. It's been a long day, guys. Didiri. And this word doesn't translate in the English language because the English language just doesn't have the heaviness of what this one word in their language means. And Didiri is listening, but not in the traditional sense with your ears only. Didiri is listening with your eyes, your entire body, your emotions, the feeling of what comes up when you're listening to the people in front of you. And I thought it was so fascinating because I think that a big part of the reason of where and why we are the way we are today is because of this disconnect. And it's this inability to show up in a place, but also to listen to one another and not immediately cancel each other out, not immediately react from a place of anger or distrust or we don't see the same way, so we can't have a conversation. And we see this a lot, actually, in the change-making space. So one of the ways that we actively listen, I'm going to throw it to the panel. What are your tips on how you've developed your listening skills? How do you do that?
I think I also just wanted to add, like, don't feel bad if you feel like you're not actively listening, because your brain is wired on probability. So the way that you're trying to connect with another person is you're trying to figure out like the point in which you're trying to get to. So you're not a bad person if you're trying to like figure that out. You're just human. That's how your brain is wired. That's number one. I think it's I would like, for me, I'm very visceral, and since like I'm in my senses with my body. And I think the gardening helps, so maybe try gardening. But I always just check in to see, you know, where I am, where I feel like I am in my body. If I'm too mental in my head, I feel like my focus is up here. So I try to like ground into my feet, ground into the space that I'm in, and have a really embodied conversation with the other person. That's been, you know, one of my tips, but also just wait for a pause, because everyone communicates differently. So sometimes people need time to reflect and to think, and also, you know, helps to just give them the space. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add to that on the presence piece, just like how you show up, like which intention. And I feel that just by being having the intention of truly listening to that person and caring from a place of care and actually wanting to learn and openness, I think that already will take you to so many places. As you said, like not jumping, allowing for space, and yeah, not coming with any type of agenda, so linked to authenticity and kindness, just like showing up with the intention to be fully present. I mean, this is very Buddhist, but I think it's very true. And I think the energy, like what you were saying, in your whole body, if you're truly present, the other person is going to feel it. So I think also there's something about trust building. And when that person is truly present, then there's a trust that happens that we believe takes months to happen, but actually could happen in a second. And it's only because you're truly present and you're building that trust and that safe space for the other person. And if you do that and allow yourself then to listen, then I think you truly build something powerful.
I would love to jump in on that as well. Just very personally, I grew up in such an intense family where if you wanted to have a say, you had to shout over 3 other people. So I hazard to say I'm not the best listener, but what I found really helpful in my relationships is that you don't always have to respond either. If you don't feel ready to kind of like speak your truth or, you know, receive what the other person is saying with your full kind of embodied presence, as you both spoke to, like giving yourself the grace to kind of like take a moment and say, all right, I want to sit with that and really understand how I'm feeling before I come back. And I found that tremendously helpful.
That's so helpful. And I think curiosity, being really just curious where someone's at, the kind of whimsy and wonder of life and finding out about different people. And as someone who is neurodivergent and on the autism spectrum, for me, social cues and socialize has always been something that I found quite difficult. And I think this is something that could help everyone actually in being present, because a lot of the times I'll be kind of masking and think about what am I going to say next, how am I going to respond, but in creating a safe space where people feel like they can show up as themselves, and you can just kind of be curious and not be thinking about what you want to say to the other person and be in the moment. I don't know if that made sense, but a combination of what everyone here has said.
It did make sense, and actually that's lesson number 6. Always ask questions and the power of curiosity. So I hope that helped answer your question. We have one more question? Or time for one more question? Yes.
Hi there, thanks for today. It's I'm of the older generation, and listening to you all, I think, I grew up in London, through the 90s and early 20s, where money was king. I worked in finance, and, thinking about our planet was not talked about at all. And as I've got older and I've watched my niece and nephew grow up, they're in their early 20s, and I do worry now about what we have done to our planet for them going forward. And especially my niece, she's very passionate about it and going forward. I think I'm asking you, what can people do of my generation to sort of bridge that gap between us and you and help you along in that? Because you shouldn't be doing it on your own. You should be getting help from us older people, so we can do it together, because we shouldn't be leaving the planet in a mess for you.
Great question. Chapter 6 and 7, all about intergenerational collaboration. I couldn't agree more. It is something where I feel also growing up in this movement, I hear and I've seen a shift also where people say young people are so inspiring, and that almost gives an excuse for the older generation to say, the young people are so inspiring, they've got it all under control. But, that's not it, and we do need to build those bridges. So maybe throwing it back to the panel, in your experience personally and professionally, what makes that meaningful bridge happen? Essentially, to answer, what do we need from the older generation, from the younger generation, to be able to successfully work together? And it's up for grabs for whoever wants.
I'm just going to give a quick announcement. There's a group called Parents for Future in the UK, and I think, of course, there's many ways to get involved, but also if you feel like, working with other parents and getting involved, I think that would be a great start to just check them out and see how you can get involved.
I'd say general advice for activism, or whatever you want to call it, change making, would be that impact comes from focus. I think with the climate crisis, it can feel so overwhelming because it's literally everything. It's the clothes we wear, the food we eat, how we get around the places we live. And I think that can feel quite paralyzing a lot of the time. So really asking, what is that one big issue? I think that's what was so inspiring, watching Mel on her journey, as a 12-year-old saying, I'm going to take on plastic pollution, but also having the wisdom to say, okay, I'm going to narrow that down to plastic bags. That was still hugely audacious and ambitious, but I think having that focus is so important when you're finding out, what is my kind of sphere of influence? And then the flip side of that is really asking yourself, what is the expertise and experience that I bring to the table? You mentioned a career in the finance industry. I know so many young people who would love to actually understand how the financial system works, because it is so damn confusing. And so having someone who is an ally and a safe space or a potential mentor to go to and ask questions and understand, well, how can we meaningfully change this system? Where should we place pressure? What are those systemic levers? You have so much to bring to younger people and to other people within the movement who are looking to create change in that area. So finding your impact through focus and asking what your sphere of influence is.
I echo the expertise advice. I feel like we're all experts in our own kind of spheres of influence, and understanding what power that holds and how you can extend that to you, whether it's your nephews or friends of friends. But it's not something I quoted. I can't remember who said it, but intergenerational problems require intergenerational solutions. So I think really understanding how they're not separate, we're all in like the same timeline, the same thread, all working towards the same thing. So really bringing that power of community and cohesiveness in one.
Okay. Whew. I think, to bring it to a close, so many lessons have been shared, and I've learned a lot, and I'm really, again, very, very grateful for all of your time, your energy, and your knowledge shared today. There's a board in the back that says actually my biggest lesson, and if you would like to add to it, you can add your lesson so we can keep learning from each other, because one of the biggest lessons from the book as well is that change making is a lifestyle. It's not something that starts at 9 a.m. and ends at 5 p.m. There's not always an office, and there's not always an end, even though events come to an end. So I always say, change making is a lifestyle. It's in every decision we make, from waking up to the point of going to sleep again. So yeah, together, let's keep learning, let's keep changing. There's books in the back, and we're all here and happy to keep answering questions. But for now, thank you very much to the Conduit as well for hosting us in this space. And I'm gonna sign books, yes, I'm gonna sign books as well. Thank you for that. I'm still working on all the plugs, but yeah, very grateful for this London book launch. And thank you all for coming today.
Thank you, Melati.